Hello and welcome to this quarter's cybersecurity webinar. We do these once a quarter, and the goal is to focus on different aspects of cybersecurity that you can use to train your team. We try and keep these in bite-sized formats so they're useful, not mundane, but basically ones that you can have your team watch on part of their regular basis, but also part of their onboarding. This will count towards your security compliance as well, which is kind of a nice little benefit. So what are we going to talk about today? Today we're going to talk about your vendors. More importantly, we're going to talk about your vendors' cybersecurity. Why would we talk about that? We're going to get into that, but basically you want to make sure that your vendors are just as protected, if not more protected, than you are. Why is that? Well, if you look at the cost of the average cybersecurity breach, it is $4.3 million on average. $4.3 million. It's a lot of money, especially for small and medium businesses. 89, what does that mean? That means that most companies have 89 different vendors with access into their network for some form. We're going to talk about some of that access that vendors have that you may not even think about, but 89 different vendors on average have access into your network. That's a lot of people. I would say 90% of small businesses have reported that they've had some kind of cyber attack that impacted their business. Again, you start to put these pieces together, it starts to look really serious, right? 98% of those organizations had at least one vendor that suffered some kind of breach. That means almost entirely the population has had some kind of vendor where that vendor had a breach. It's not that uncommon. We're going to talk a little bit about that later on as well. 59% experienced some kind of data breach by a third party. So basically, 59% of the companies that have had some kind of event, they were actually not caused by them, but caused by a third party. And then 63% of the data breaches were directly linked to a third party. 54% do not even monitor privacy and security patches of their third party. I actually think that number is probably a lot higher than that. And lastly, 62% of them people believe that they don't really have to worry about their vendor's security. They think if they're secure, that's all that matters. They don't have to worry about their vendors. We're going to show you why that unfortunately is not true. All right, let's talk about us a little bit. Braver Technologies and managed service provider. We've been around for over 30 years. We do IT support for small, medium companies. We will supplement your existing IT staff, or we will take care of everything that you need. Our services are very broad. We can do pretty much everything that you think you need to have done, from daily IT support, help desk, live help desk, 24/7 live help desk, security, as we're going to talk about right now, web design, application design, you name it. We have a function in that business area. The other shameless request that I will have is that if you are watching this on YouTube, please like and subscribe. This really helps us out a lot. Doesn't do anything to you, doesn't cause any spamming or anything like that, but actually helps us know what we're doing, but it helps us promote ourselves. And that's really the reason that we want to kind of keep promoting these videos to help serve everybody in the cybersecurity. It's already been a big accomplishment. A lot of people watch them. We want to keep that going. Thank you for your help in that. Okay, what are we going to talk about today? Well, I'm going to recover some real world incidents. The reason I'm going to do this is that we want to show you that it's not the size of the company that exposes it. Every company can be exposed, and also that it can happen and what the impacts are of that. I'm going to talk about a cybersecurity assessment for the vendors, for your vendors. I'm going to talk about mitigating risk, incident response planning. What do you do if something does happen? And then talking about how to keep your team vigilant in their cybersecurity. Okay, so let's talk about some real world cases. We're not going to go into a lot of detail on these, but let's talk about first, what are we worried about, right? First and foremost, data breaches. That's the one that most people are aware of right now. Somebody comes in, access your data, does something with that data that you don't want them to do. That is the first and foremost thing that everybody thinks of, and obviously it's a big concern, and it is one of the robust ones that we have to worry about. But also, what people don't think about is a reputational damage. If you have a vendor that suffers some kind of attack, and that attack affects your ability to deliver your service, that's going to affect your reputation with your clients. They're going to say, okay, I need to get this somewhere. I got to get this done. I'm sorry you've had this issue, but I have my needs to take care of my clients as well. That's a problem. It may take you out of compliance. If you are compliant and something happens to your vendor, it may take you out of compliance on that side. And then operational disruptions. What does that mean? This is one that most people don't think of, but it actually is very impactful. If there is a cybersecurity incident that affects your system, it prevents people from doing work at your own team, your own employees get really frustrated. They get really, really anxious, really frustrated, and it affects them mentally and emotionally. And that obviously affects the quality of their work, if they can work at all while that outage is happening. All right, so now let's talk about some examples so that you can see what's happening. So Equifax, we're going to talk about big companies and big issues. And the reason I want to focus on four big companies is that to show you that it's not a matter of cost. These companies have deep pockets. They could pay for every security they can, and they probably did, but they are still vulnerable. So it still has to be important that you monitor your vendors because some of these vendors, unfortunately, they were a little lax in their security. Not all of them. This one in particular, they were using the Apache server and didn't have it patched properly, and it became exploited. With that, so information regarding 147 million clients were released out into the wild. This is data information that can be used. Once you get into PHI for people, it's very easy for the bad guys to use that to a disadvantage to the consumer. And this is what happened in this case. Same thing with Saks. They're saying they don't know what happened. Basically, most likely what happened is they were a victim of some kind of phishing attack, right? And they were getting into emails and receiving emails and basically sending out misinformation. Ended up getting the bad guys ended up getting access to credit cards and debit cards. I don't need to tell you why that's a bad thing. So they ended up getting access to these illegal debit cards and credit cards, despite compliance things that we're going to talk in later on. Target is a very interesting one because this one came in through the HVAC vendor. The HVAC vendor was tied into their system. What happened was the HVAC system was breached. So the bad guys thought, geez, Target's pretty good. They got this pretty locked down, but oh, look at this HVAC system. What the heck? Let me try and break into that. They did. Once they broke into that, like, oh, look at that. It has full access to the network. Once they did that, got all of the information for 70 million clients. And the last one we'll talk about is Rackspace. Rackspace is concerning because this one had to do with an exploit that was somewhat known at the time, but Rackspace didn't it may not have updated their systems as quick as they could have to mitigate it. These were Exchange servers that should have been probably deprecated, and to their own admission, they were in the process of moving them over to Office 365. But the problem here is that Rackspace was hosting email for many other people. They were hosting about 30,000 clients' email systems that got breached. Again, once you get into somebody's email system, there's a lot you can do with that data, and they did. So these are big companies that had big budgets, but still, unfortunately, were breached. This is why it's important to find out from them, expect any size client that you have, what is their cybersecurity policy and having standards. So let's talk about the standards. So PCI compliance. So these are some of the standards that are in place. PCI compliance has been around for a very long time. This has to do with credit cards. And you can see since it was credit cards, it was in very, very early on. And if your vendor takes and maintains your credit card, then you want to make sure that they have some kind of PCI compliance that they are meeting. Usually it's by a third party. Typically, the bank that's issuing the PCI, the credit card, will force a PCI compliance standard. Next is ISO, and ISO now includes a lot of detail as far as software analysis and way data is processed. HIPAA. We've all heard of HIPAA, or most of us should have. This is obviously important because it's healthcare. But you want to make sure that your healthcare provider is actually performing their HIPAA standards and not just saying that they are. It's really important that they do because this is your health information, which then can be used against you. SOC 2 is nice because it's by a third party, AICPA, so you need a CPA in order to SOC 2. A lots of compliance and regulations built into SOC 2. GDPR is the European standard that came out a few years ago. Very strict. If anybody does work with European entities, they're supposed to adhere by the GDPR. Next, we get into NIST and FISMA. So now we're starting to get into the newer technologies that are in the specific for IT industry. NIST is one of those. So NIST is a framework that allows you to have security systems in place for your computers so that you know that if somebody is NIST compliant, that you can basically have an idea that they've gone through certain regulations in order to make sure that their computer network is secure. And lastly, CMMC. Right now, this is kind of the gold standard in that because the Department of Defense has their own. It's sort of like they took NIST and built on it and made it even stronger. CMMC is much more diligent and requires a third party in order to enable it. But basically, if somebody is CMMC compliant, it's good enough for the Department of Defense. That's the best that we can get right now as far as compliance standards. Okay. So obviously, one thing you should be asking yourself is, okay, well, you're telling me about vendor security. What are you guys doing about your own security? Well, I'm happy to say that we are very proud and we actually publish what our own security standards are. We make sure that every client that we take on gets a copy of how we protect ourselves. We weren't getting enough clients asking us about our security, to be quite honest with you. And we thought, they really should be asking us what our own security was. So we started putting together our own document so that when anybody asks us, which they should, we can actually give them a document that says, yep, this is what we do to protect ourselves and make sure that we are up to snuff on what we think is the industry standard in cybersecurity. But what are some of the questions that you should ask a vendor? We're actually going to go through that now. This is sort of like the meat and potatoes of this webinar right now is what should you ask? All right, so you should ask, do they conduct comprehensive risk assessments? How often do they have risk assessments done on themselves? That's a key question. Do they have a dedicated cybersecurity team and/or chief information security officer? If they are too small to have that, then who is the point person that is in charge of cybersecurity at the organization? If it's a third party, who is the third party? Many of our clients use us as the third party for their security, and that's fine. You just want to know that it's in place. Does the vendor have a written cybersecurity policy that is regularly updated and viewed? We have some clients who are awesome on this. I'd love to call them out by name right now, but it wouldn't be appropriate. We have some that are so good, and they send their cybersecurity policy to us, and we take a look at it. But they have it, and they review it on a regular basis with their team. You want to make sure your vendors are doing that too. Do they have a plan in place in case of an event breach? Do they have an incident response plan? We're going to talk a little bit about that later on, but do they have a plan? What happens if you ask them, okay, well, if you do have a breach, what are you going to do? Okay, well, we're going to spin up our servers offsite. How often do you test your servers offsite? Okay, we test our servers offsite once a week, once a month, once a quarter, whatever it may be. Just ask them what that policy is. Do they conduct regular security audits? They should be doing vulnerability tests or some kind of vulnerability assessment on a regular basis. Do they have a backup plan, right? What happens if everything goes down? How are they going to keep you up and running? What are their critical systems that they have in place? Do they have a data protection strategy in place? What are they doing to protect your data? How do they have that secure? If somebody in the front office is just whose job is to answer phones and make sure the calls go through, does that person have access to your data? And if they do they require it in order to do their job? They shouldn't if it's not part of their job. If it's not part of their job to take care of you, they should not have access to that data. Do they have encryption in place? This is really important. Do they have it, especially on notebooks? And nowadays, most computers are notebooks. Are the notebooks encrypted? If somebody accidentally forgets their notebook on a subway, is your data at risk in that computer? It must be encrypted in order for that to be secure. Do they monitor and manage user access? Who has access to what documents? Who has access to the admin in the system? And also, is that admin account two-factor authentication? Is there a second form of access in order to get to that account? Does the vendor do patch management systems? We do patching every day on our clients. It is important to do patching. This is where those vulnerabilities, remember I mentioned some of those vulnerabilities early on for the big companies because they didn't do patches on their systems. That's why we mentioned it. Do they have security disposing of data, right? So if you worked with them or you're done with them and they're done with that data, how do they get rid of it? How do they dispose of it? endpoint detection response, so remediation. So basically EDR, used to be called antivirus, now they call it EDR. How often is it updated and is it monitored? All of our clients have an EDR that is updated throughout the day and monitored 24/7 by a live security team. What's the process for antivirus on integration? What is the system that they have set up for security? How do they get this in place? And do they have a live 24/7 SOC? That's what I just talked about. If you're one of our clients, you definitely have a live 24/7 SOC, but does your vendor have a 24/7 SOC? You want to make sure that part of the contract that you have with that vendor states that they have some kind of data security on their end to protect your data. It's really important that you protect yourself up front and make sure that you know. You want to have some things that they maintain confidence of the personal information. That personal information is slowly under the agreement. So it's basically you want to make sure that it's only part of this agreement that information is considered, not any other ones. And then so basically you want to make sure that your third party has the same agreement that you have with yourself or with your own clients. And then make sure that they implement security measures. We just talked about all of those, right? All right, do they have continued cybersecurity monitoring and audits in place? This could be a SIM, it could be a SOC, it could be anything. Are they making sure that they're monitored on a regular basis? Do they have security training and communication? Guess what? This counts as security training for you if in case any of your clients ask you that. Say, yes, we've gone through the security training. We do it on a regular basis. It's uploaded quarterly. Do they do security training for their team? And how do they do it? This could be phishing testing, which is also an excellent way to do security training. All of that counts. What happens if an escalation protocol? What happens if what's the steps that they take if anything happens? And is there compliance? If they're under some kind of compliance, you want to verify that they have that standard for you. SOC 2, CMMC, NIST, whatever. Have them show you a copy of that document or at least something that states that they have it. Okay. Free cybersecurity training. So basically, we offer vendor cybersecurity training, just like we're talking about now. What do we have up there? We have this checklist that we're going through right now. So basically, the way to get this checklist, so we just went through a vendor checklist, is actually more, we're going to be putting up on our website a checklist that you can download that'll help you ask those questions to your vendors. We covered some of them in this webinar. There's actually some more on this document. So go up on our website. It's under the free cybersecurity training section right here. And then you go to the vendor cybersecurity training, and then there's going to be a download link for it. This video will also be up there. That's where you can find this video when it is done. Okay, so we're going to go into some practices. So cybersecurity, so 24/7 SOC. I've talked about this. The reason that it's in here 3 times is that it's extremely important to have a 24/7 live SOC. It's also, you want to make sure you and your clients have an incident response plan. You want to make sure that if something happens, you're not trying to figure out what to do at the moment. You don't want to have a fire and then figure out that you need a fire extinguisher. You want to have the fire extinguisher ready in the house where you need it, ready to go. That's what an incident response plan gives you. It gives you that fire extinguisher that's ready within reach. We have available that you can get different templates that you can use. So in case your clients ever ask you, hey, what is your policy for remote access? What is your policy for incident? What's your continuity plan? We actually have templates that you can use that we make available to you. Just reach out to us on our website. That data is coming up a little bit later on. We also provide our clients with security scorecards. You should make sure that your vendor is doing, if you're not a client of ours, make sure that your MSP is giving you a security scorecard on a regular basis. How does your system match up? Then also you want to ask your vendor, do they have a security scorecard? Security templates and policies. Again, this is where we have access for you for remote work policies, policies on how to access your computers while you're at the office, away from the office, what to do with vendors. We have a whole bunch of policies already written up for you that you can use as a template. This is great, especially for those of you going through SOC audits or anything like that. Reach out to us. We'll make those available to you. We do have a dedicated cybersecurity division. Why do we have a dedicated cybersecurity division? Well, think of a managed service provider as sort of like a general practitioner. You're going to go to that doctor, and that doctor they're in charge of keeping you healthy on a daily basis. They're going to be knowledgeable on your whole body, making sure all the pieces work. But they also know that if you're having a problem and all of a sudden they find that you have an irregular heartbeat and you need to have that looked at, you're not going to go to a general practitioner. You're going to go to a specialist. You're going to go to a heart specialist. This is what Cyber 74 is. This is our security specialist. They go that next level down. They do things to that next degree that you may need. They do detection response, continuous testing, but they also do audits. They do security assessments, true penetration testing. They offer managed security sessions, detection response, threat detection, NIST compliance, CMMC compliance. We talked about those earlier, and then helping with SOC 2 compliance. Okay, we covered a lot of ground in here. Let's talk about what we did. We talked about real world incidents, right? We talked about what happens in the actual world. What if there's that unfortunately did happen with security breaches? We talked about the vendor cybersecurity assessment. That was the main part of this webinar, is to get you that checklist that you can use to evaluate your vendors. We talked about how to mitigate risk for your system. We talked about incident response planning. We talked about your team and building them up. We make tools available to your team or anybody that you want, which is we send out weekly cybersecurity tips that your team can utilize, and we keep these updated on a regular basis on what's going on in the industry. We also offer on our website free cybersecurity training. We want you to use this. This is intentionally free for everybody across the board. We want your system to be safe, no matter who you are. We keep all of our videos up there. We want you to use them as part of the onboarding training for your team. It is important that everybody stays up to date on all of the cybersecurity information out there. That's all I have. This is how you can contact us if you want more information about either this webinar or what we do for managed service provider. Obviously, we'd love to hear from you. We're going to put this video up online. Like I said, please like and subscribe. If it was even the least bit helpful, it would be a great help to us as well if you did. Okay, for those of you watching this live, we're going to stick around for a few minutes for questions and answers to see if anybody has anything that we can help them with. Thank you so much.